Today, we're going to look at what happens after the shooting stops. You know, when a nation wins on the battlefield, but then has to fight a second, even harder war. A war fought not with swords, but with words, at a negotiating table where the entire future of a country is on the line. This is the story of the Treaty of Lausanne.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's September 1922. The Turkish War of Independence is, for all intents and purposes, over. The Greek army has been driven out of Anatolia, and you can almost feel the collective sigh of relief as the fires of war finally start to die down. But for the new leadership in Ankara, the fight was a long way from being finished. In fact, the real battle was just getting started. And hey, before we dive in, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on the notification bell, share, and like my videos. All the information in this explainer was compiled from open sources. Thank you so much.
I love this quote because it captures the moment perfectly. The swords were put away, sure, but the fire, that burning desire for independence, it just moved. A military victory is great, but it means absolutely nothing if the rest of the world doesn't recognize it. The war for Turkey's soul was about to move from the muddy trenches of Anatolia to the pristine ballrooms of Switzerland. Now, to really get what was at stake here, you have to understand this thing, the Treaty of Sèvres. This treaty, which was forced on the Ottomans just 2 years earlier, wasn't a peace agreement. Let's be clear, it was a death sentence for a nation. It carved up the Turkish heartland, handed control of the economy to foreign powers, and basically reduced a once great empire into a tiny, powerless puppet state. The Turkish national movement had just fought and won a brutal war to stop this from happening. And now, at Lausanne, their mission was to make sure it stayed dead and buried.
From the battlefield to the ballroom, Mustafa Kemal was a brilliant strategist, and he knew that a military victory could just evaporate if it wasn't cemented in international law. He needed a negotiator who was just as tough as his soldiers, and he picked General Ismet Pasha. The mission was simple, but incredibly hard. Tear up the Treaty of Sèvres and force the world to recognize a brand new, fully independent Turkey.
The conference at Lausanne wasn't just about dusty legal documents and drawing lines on a map. No, from day one, it was a brutal psychological battle, a true contest of wills. And it was symbolized by two very simple things, a chair and an ear. So in one corner, you've got Lord Curzon, the powerful British Foreign Secretary. This guy was the literal embodiment of the British Empire. He looked at Turkey and saw the defeated, sick man of Europe coming to him to beg for whatever scraps he'd offer. And in the other corner, you have Ismet Pasha. He's not representing some dying empire. He's a victorious general, the face of a new nation that was literally born from fire. And he was there demanding, not asking, to be treated as an equal. And the whole world was watching this showdown. American newspapers were fascinated by Ismet Pasha. They called him the mini general. They wrote about how serious he was, but also about his unshakable calm and confidence. They could see he wasn't just some soldier. He was a brilliant intellectual who was not going to be easily pushed around. And that resolve was tested right away in what's famously known as the chair crisis. Lord Curzon, who was running the conference, sat in this huge, fancy armchair. Ismet Pasha was shown to a smaller, lower chair, and he just refused to sit. It was such a simple but powerful move. He was sending a message. We are not beneath you, we are your equals. And he literally stood his ground until they brought him a chair of the exact same size. He was living out the very words on this slide. Equality was the price of admission.
And then you have the strange case of the ear. The American press reported that Ismet Pasha was partially deaf. But here's the brilliant part. He turned what could have been a disadvantage into an incredible diplomatic weapon. Whenever Lord Curzon would go on one of his long, angry speeches or make threats, Ismet Pasha would just cup his ear and say, "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that." You can just imagine how infuriating that was. It completely exhausted the British delegation and allowed him to ignore all the bluster and just calmly, relentlessly repeat Turkey's one core demand: full, unconditional independence.
Okay, so the psychological games were just the opening act. The main event, the biggest fight at Lausanne, was over a single concept that had been strangling the Ottoman economy for centuries: capitulations. So what on earth were these capitulations? Well, imagine living in a country where foreigners were basically immune to your laws. They paid almost no taxes, they ran their own courts and their own schools, your own police couldn't even enter their property without permission. These rules turned the country into a semi-colony, where its own citizens were treated like second-class people in their own homeland. They were economic chains.
Lord Curzon and the Allies, they tried to play games. They suggested a reformed system, basically wanting to keep all their privileges but just call them something different. But Ismet Pasha's response was absolute. As this quote shows, he drew a line in the sand. There was no room for compromise here, no new form, no special status. The capitulations had to be gone. Completely. Forever. This was the economic foundation of Turkey's independence.
Getting rid of the capitulations was a massive, massive victory. But Lausanne achieved something even bigger. It took the map that was drawn up by the Treaty of Sèvres and, symbolically, just burned it to a crisp.
I mean, just look at the difference here. It's night and day. Where Sèvres meant being a puppet state under Allied control, Lausanne meant full independence. Where Sèvres meant foreigners controlling your money, Lausanne meant economic freedom. Sèvres literally dismembered the country, Lausanne secured the borders that the nationalists had fought and died for. It was the difference between a surrender dictated to a defeated enemy and a real victory negotiated between equals.
And listen, this wasn't just how the Turks saw it. Even their former enemies were stunned. A year after the treaty was signed, someone stood up in the French Parliament and called it the most important diplomatic success of our age. Think about that. That's a stunning admission from a country that, just a few years earlier, was trying to carve Turkey up for itself.
The impact here was bigger than just Turkey. For over 100 years, the great powers of Europe had been debating something they called the Eastern Question, which, let's be honest, was just a fancy diplomatic way of asking, so when the Ottoman Empire finally dies, how are we going to slice it up for ourselves? Lausanne provided the final, shocking answer. You're not. The question was officially closed, not by Europe, but by the Turks themselves.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Why has this treaty lasted for over a century when so many other post-war treaties just completely fell apart? Well, the secret is in how it was made.
See, unlike the famous Treaty of Versailles, which was basically shoved down Germany's throat, Lausanne was a genuine negotiation. It was hammered out over 8 incredibly long months of arguments, debates, and standoffs. It was made between two sides that, by the end of it all, had to respect each other's power. And that foundation of mutual, even if it was reluctant, consent is the real key to why it's been so durable.
Now, that doesn't mean it was a total 100% win on every single issue. Diplomacy is the art of the possible, and Turkey definitely had to make some compromises. The biggest one was probably the issue of the Turkish Straits. An international straits commission was set up to manage that crucial waterway. It was a temporary limit on Turkey's total control, but it was a concession they had to make to get the whole deal done.
But on certain issues, the Turkish delegation had crystal clear instructions from Ankara. There were red lines, lines that could not be crossed, period. The two biggest were these. First, the absolute total abolition of the capitulations. And second, no way would they accept the creation of a new Armenian state carved out of eastern Anatolia, like Sèvres had planned. On those 2 points, Ismet Pasha was told to pack his bags and walk away from the whole thing if the Allies didn't cave.
And this brings us right to its legacy today. Over the years, all these myths have popped up about Lausanne, that it has secret clauses or that it magically expires after 100 years. Let's be really clear. The historical record shows that this is all nonsense. The treaty is a public document. There are no hidden articles. There is no expiration date. It is the permanent, internationally recognized birth certificate, the official title deed of the modern Republic of Turkey.
And so, that's the question we're left with. The world of 1923 is gone, but this document, forged in a battle of wits and wills, continues to define a nation's sovereignty and its place in the world. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important wars are won not with swords, but with a stubborn refusal to be treated as anything less than an equal. Thanks for joining us.